Once again, salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Before we begin today's majlis, I would like to request dua for some members of our community who are ill, for all mu'mineen who are sick. We pray to Allah for shifa and for siha and for afiyah and well-being for them. It is recommended to recite Surah Al-Fatiha for any of our family members, community members who are sick with the intention of cure. So I request all of you to recite Surah Al-Fatiha with that intention for Allah to provide health and well-being to all of our sick community members. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen Ar-Rahmanir Rahim Maliki Yawmiddin Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'een Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Before we begin today's majlis, I would also like to request a special Surah Al-Fatiha for the shuhada of the very vicious attack in Kabul in a school. Last information that I have, 30 innocent young mu'mineen lost their lives, and this is, of course, not the first attack that we have seen in the Hazara community. We pray to Allah for those who have died, that may He shower them with His mercy, and for their families, may He give them consolation and strength. And for the community of Hazara Muslims in particular, and for all mu'mineen wherever they may be subject to violence or attack or where they are not safe, may Allah grant them strength and protection. For those shuhada in Kabul and for all other shuhada of Islam, please recite Surah Al-Fatiha. And finally, for the marhumeen of the sponsors of tonight's majlis, for marhum Mirza Asghar Beg, Sabira Begum, Nikat Begum, Muhammad Ali, Afsar Jahan, and for Fawziya Fatima, for the marhumeen of your own families, and also for the marhumeen of all of those people who have participated and assisted in these gatherings of mourning and remembrance for Ahlul Bayt, because this is the majlis of our 11th Imam, and it is also by tradition and by symbolism the final majlis of a season of grief and remembrance. So all of those who sponsored programs, who recited Marthia, Noha, who volunteered their time, their tears, their efforts, their energies, or any other form of participation here in this center or in any other Islamic center or place of commemoration at their homes, in processions, in ziyarat, in Karbala, for all of the mu'mineen who gave their love and their attention to Ahlul Bayt, for their marhumeen and the elevation of their ranks, and for the marhumeen of our sponsors. One final Surah Al-Fatiha. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Mu'mineen and mu'minat, as you know, we are gathered today to remember the death and the martyrdom of our 11th Imam, the heir of the knowledge and the piety and the symbol of the message of Islam itself, and the final link in the chain of imamat before it came to the Imam of our time, Imam Mahdi. May Allah hasten his appearance. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And that is our 11th Imam, Imam Hassan ibn Ali al-Zaki al-Askari alayhim as-salatu was-salam. Salawat ala Muhammad. So very briefly today, I would like to remember and to honor our Imam by just giving a very quick reminder of some aspects of his life, not a detailed biography, and some of his very important and very eloquent teachings, and then some of the circumstances and the lessons we learn from the times and the situation of the Shia and the Muslim community in the time of our 11th Imam. Now, many people, when they think of our Imams, they think that every Imam was there for a generation. So they think of 12 Imams as governing the first 12 generations of the life of the Muslim community. But although there were some Imams who had a relatively lengthy period of imamat, the majority of our Imams did not have a very lengthy period of imamat and the office of guiding their Shia and the Muslim community at large. And that is because our Imams lived in very difficult circumstances. And they were not allowed, while they were alive, to live and preach in peace. And they were also not allowed to live their natural lifespan. And that in general, not just our 11th Imam, but all of our Imams, that is a reminder for many of us, because we are accustomed to comfort and to luxury. And so many of us, maybe even without realizing it, we have that expectation that we will take care of our religion and we will take care of our priorities when things settle down. When I don't have a lot going on in my life, when I don't have financial concerns, when I don't have health concerns, when I don't have issues in my family, when I'm not so busy, when I'm not so stressed, that's when I will sit down and I will make sure that my religious practice is proper. I will learn those things that maybe I do not know and therefore I do not practice well right now. I will make up for any shortcomings that I may have had in my prayer, maybe if I've missed some days of fasting, if I'm not attending majalis or attending the masjid so much right now, if I may not have paid my khums or my other obligations. So I will figure it out when things settle down. Right now, I'm still studying, or I'm still taking on debt, or I'm still paying down debt, or I'm still not there yet in terms of where I want to be in my life. And so I don't feel like I have the bandwidth to take care of these religious tasks. And the lesson that we learn from the life of our Imams is that even in the times of greatest difficulty and greatest stress, you have the ability to fulfill your duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in fact, that small amount of sadaqah that you give in a time of hardship, it might not be as big as what you can give in a time of ease and comfort. But it will have more barakah and more benefit for your life and for your soul, maybe than a very big contribution that you can give in a time of comfort. Because sometimes we do the most when we don't have any other debts, any other concerns, any other worries. And so even like we feel we are doing much, in reality it is extra. After I have taken care of all my needs and all of my wants and all of my whims, then I am giving something in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when I might not have that much, and I have to decide that if I am going to give this sadaqah, that means that I will not be able to eat out. I will not be able to buy the coffee that I wanted to. This is the only cash that I have right now, or the only money that I have right now, and I am going to give this small amount for a worthy cause. We might not even think of it as a big deal. But if it is a priority in our life rather than just extra, for Allah, that might be the act that He considers to be one of our greatest good deeds. Because Allah does not need our time. He doesn't need our money. He doesn't need our experience and our intelligence and our advice that we are going to give to an Islamic organization or an Islamic project. Allah has mulkus samawati wal ard. Allah owns everything in heavens and earth. So even if I give $1 million, even if I worship Allah for an entire lifetime of many decades, even if I give a great deal of knowledge and experience to an Islamic organization, whether it be religious knowledge or technical or professional knowledge of another sort. It's not like I have added something to the treasury of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah was $1 million short of being able to take care of His needs, and my contribution helped. Or Allah was stuck on some Islamic issue, and then my scholarship solved that problem for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or Allah, He needed to fill a time card, and there just weren't enough volunteers, and so my contribution put that project over the top and made it possible. If Allah has a project that He wants to see succeed, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will search out people who are worthy, and He will give them not the burden, but the opportunity and the honor to contribute in whatever way that they are able. And sometimes the greatest contribution is the one that other people may not even notice and that we ourselves may not think is great. And we see that in the life of our Imams, how they created such peerless examples of benefit and blessings for Islam and for humanity. But they didn't do so in times of plenty and in times of ease. They did so in spite of the oppression of governments, in spite of all of the hardships and the sufferings that they had. They did so in spite of the fact that even their lives themselves were cut short from their natural duration because of the animosity and the oppression of governments. And that is a very important lesson. I should never think that when I graduate, when I pay off my debt, when I am older, when my kids are older, when things are easy, that's when I'm going to give time to Islam. If I can't make time for it now, then I might not get the tawfiq and the honor from Allah to do it then. And if I don't make the habit of doing it now, then I will not be able to do it with as much sincerity and as much purity when times are easy and I have abundance of resources and abilities at my disposal. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So in contrast to, for example, our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu was-salam, whose imamat was approximately 34 years in duration, lunar years, or in contrast to our seventh Imam, Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salatu was-salam, whose imamat was approximately 35 years in duration. That is the duration of a generation. A person from birth until the time when they get married and then they have their first children, that on average is about 30 to 40 years. So the imamat of our sixth and our seventh Imams, they were each one generation had changed. A generation that was young now was at the prime of their life. And those that were just born, they will have come of age. That is the longer end of the imamat of a small number of our Imams. Then we have those Imams whose imamat was much shorter. Our second and third Imam, Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba and Imam Hussain, Sayyid al-Shuhada, alayhim as-salatu was-salam. Together their imamat was 20 years. So we have so much in terms of guidance, in terms of ahadith and the lessons and the beautiful example that we get from our second and from our third Imam. In fact, we can say that much of the preservation of Islam is due not just to the heritage that we have learned from both of these Imams, but due to the events in one day of the imamat of one of those Imams. Just the day of Ashura itself can inspire us, can teach us, can guide us over an entire lifetime. Not to limit the life of Imam Hussain or Imam Hassan and Imam Hussain into Ashura, that is an injustice. But if we were just to look at the lessons of that one day, then it could sustain us spiritually for an entire lifetime. But to move beyond just one day, if we look at the imamat in its entirety of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussain, then together it is less than the imamat of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq or Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhim as-salatu was-salam. Salawat alayhi. So we can see that there were different durations. Our 11th Imam had the shortest imamat out of all of our Imams. So now we will talk briefly about our 11th Imam. His imamat out of all of our Imams, some of whom had a longer period of leadership and some of whom had a shorter period of leadership, his was the shortest period of imamat, which was only, as we heard just a few moments ago, 6 years. From the death of his father, our 10th Imam, in Samarra in the year 254, to his own death in the year 260. 6 years was the imamat of our 11th Imam. He was not the youngest of our Imams at the time of his martyrdom. That was his grandfather, our 9th Imam, Imam Muhammad ibn Ali al-Taqi al-Jawad alayhi as-salatu was-salam. He was 25 years at the age of his death. 25 years, we think of that as just the prime or the beginning of a person's life. In our time, people are sometimes just finishing up an undergraduate degree and making a decision about marriage, making a decision about career, maybe about their professional goals, whether to pursue graduate school, and if so, what specialization to take. So they're still at the beginning of that journey of life. That was the age of our 9th Imam at the time of his martyrdom. And our 11th Imam, he, at the age of his martyrdom, was only 3 years older than his grandfather, Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi salatu wassalam, was martyred at the very young age of 28 years of age. So he was the Imam for 6 years. He became the Imam at the age of 22. And he was martyred at the age of 28. A very young age. In fact, after Imam Muhammad Taqi, our 11th Imam was the second youngest Imam at the time of his death, at the time of his martyrdom. And that also is a lived example and a lesson for us. In our time and in our society, we have people delaying their adulthood. We grow up late. We want to grow up late and delay our childhood, our adolescence, and stay in that irresponsible or immature state as long as we can. And society is also built in that way that adulthood is not handled in a reasonable and especially in a spiritually healthy manner. Extreme example of that is that if you are one day before your 18th birthday, then you are entirely your parents' responsibility. They can make important life decisions for you without your input. And then you turn 18 and your parents cannot make any decisions for you. You are independent. And some people, they have actually a day marked on the calendar. They are waiting to say to their parents, I'm 18 now. Now I'm in charge of my own life. But if this is the legal system, then it should represent an underlying reality within a person's development and within a person's soul. And we can, without even having to do research, understand that adulthood is not something that you turn on in one night. Yesterday, I was too immature to decide where I want to live. So God forbid if I run away from home, then the authorities will return me to the care of my parents. But the next night, all of a sudden, now some new revelation will come to me, new enlightenment will come within my heart, and now it's up to me. How to live, where to live, what to do with my finances. This is not logical or reasonable. What is the logic that we have in Islam? In Islam, we are taught that you should not delay your adulthood. And as parents, you should not baby your children by keeping from them an understanding of important issues in life and especially in their spiritual beings. There is a hadith from our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. This is a hadith that tells us also the lived example of Ahlul Bayt, and then of course the imamat of our imams in that young age. It is also a role model and an example for our young members of the community. Even though we are not ma'soom, and so we are never going to be able to have the wisdom or the ability to make adult decisions in childhood, but we model our youth, we model our middle age, we model our old age on Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam. And just like I cannot be as wise as the Imam in my childhood, I also cannot be as wise as the Imam in my old age. But I do model myself on the Imam in old age. So similarly, I should model myself on the Imam in middle age. And I should model myself on the Imam in childhood. Don't think that, well, they were ma'soom and their becoming Imam as a child was a miracle, and so it doesn't have a lesson for me. Their becoming an Imam as a child was surprising for us, but it was no more miraculous than their wisdom and their guidance when they were older. It was equally a gift, a miracle, and far above the horizon of any human being. We just are not used to it as a child, and so we say that the Imam was able to provide answers that even the most prominent scholars of their time could not provide when they were only 8 years old. Yes, that is true. But the Imam was equally above the horizon of all of their peers, and even the most learned members of the Ummah at any age in their life, younger or older than that period that we might consider to be a miracle. So they are a role model. So the hadith from our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam, is that when something would be a burden on the heart and soul of my father, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salatu wassalam, when he had a difficult issue in his life, then he would call the women folk of his household and he would call the children of his household. It's a very beautiful hadith that teaches us how to do dua, but also how to come together as a family in terms of our spiritual life. He would call the women folk of his family, and he would call the children of his family. And then the Imam would say that I am going to recite dua. There is some important issue that has come up which has weighed on my heart. Maybe it would be a concern for the health of a family member. Maybe it would be an issue that had come up among the followers of the Imam a companion who had been unjustly arrested, somebody who had undergone a hardship, somebody who had requested the Imam for his du'as and for his blessings, anything that was on the mind of the Imam and that was now taking up his time and his thoughts. The Imam said, I will ask Allah for his assistance. And I ask all of you to recite Ameen, meaning to complete and to add your dua to my dua. So when I do dua, you say Ameen, which is that you will also listen and you will join in my dua. Now, how many times do we see in our community that the mother and the father in the family, they have different concerns? Sometimes we hear about it, we see it, that there is a financial difficulty, there is an issue maybe with one of the children, and one of the parents is aware of it and is handling it and is undergoing stress, and the other person is not even aware. I just keep it to myself. And by bottling it up, I might think that I am protecting the other members of my family. But by bottling it up, in many cases, I am actually preventing them from understanding why it is that I might be quiet, or I might be irritable, or I might be in stress. And so they're not protected, but they are actually going to be affected, and they may be suffering without even having any understanding of what is going on. And then that can create misunderstandings and distance. And then if we don't share with our children, then we are passing up one opportunity to give them instruction about adult concerns. The point was that in our Islamic conception, adulthood is not something that just turns on like a light switch on your 18th birthday, but it is something that is developed and that is nourished from when a child is still young, so that as they become physically and mentally and emotionally more mature, they are progressively able to understand adult issues before they have to handle those responsibilities themselves. They have a window into the financial decisions of their parents before they have to handle a large amount of money. They have a window into the family decisions and interpersonal decisions of their parents before they themselves have to deal and make decisions about their in-laws and about those areas of life that will come in their future. But now when you share, how you share is very important. And this is the beauty of the hadith that I just mentioned. Because it's very possible for me to have a worry that, my company is downsizing and I'm worried about being laid off. And now when I mention it, then there's two people who are equally stressed. And now that creates a greater hardship for the family. Rather than the children, for example, having one strong person who can help weather the difficulty, both parents are equally stressed. Sometimes by introducing adult issues to children, they don't have context. They don't have experience. They might become very worried and jump to conclusions. So how you introduce it is also just as important as whether you introduce it. And that is why the practice and the teaching of our Imam was to introduce it through the lens of dua. Because dua is intrinsically not just giving information and then putting a probability on it. That there's a 50% chance that I will be laid off. you know what? The prognosis for this sickness is 2 out of 3 people have a successful procedure, for example, or more or less. That's not the lens of dua. The lens of dua is, oh Allah, you are the source of all goodness and all mercy. You are the one who has infinite knowledge and infinite power and infinite mercy. We ask you in this time of distress or in this time of hardship that make that which we might consider to be unlikely or even impossible, possible through your wisdom and through your kindness. So when you introduce the issue through the issue of lens, through the lens of dua, then you are introducing it through the lens of optimism. Not just as a difficulty or a challenge that the family is going through. So if I, as an adult or somebody in the field, I might have the resources to be able to deal with the stress. But another member of my family, and especially a younger member of the family, they might not have that. I'm not introducing them to the full weight of that health concern or the full weight of that financial concern. But I'm giving them some inkling that money doesn't grow on trees. We don't live forever. Death is a reality. And children can understand in their own way that death is a reality, but we do it through the lens of hope, through the lens of introducing them to God's mercy. I will do dua, and I ask you to say Ameen. Don't shield the issues, and especially the dua, from your children. So this is the Islamic model of training an adult. By the time our children are 13 or 14 and they are baligh, they are responsible for their prayers. Meaning their moral agency is recognized by Islam at a much younger age than it is in our secular or legal culture. Of course, they still will be dependent on their parents, but it is a progressive and a guided adulthood that begins younger, looking towards the future and being ready for it. And the final thing that I will say is that if in the West adulthood is delayed, then adulthood also comes suddenly. In Islam, becoming baligh is brought forward. Being introduced to adult issues through the lens of dua and the lens of hope is brought earlier in the life. But as a Muslim, whether you are 18 or 88, if you are lucky enough for your parents to be alive, you never get to say, I'm an adult, and now I'm old enough to make my own decisions. Even if you are 80, and if by the grace of Allah your parents are alive, they might be in their 90s or even older than that, you still can't say, well, now I am old enough to make my own decisions. You still have to do ihsan and honor the concerns of your parents. That obligation never goes away. So Islam brings earlier the training for adulthood, but it keeps throughout our life the obligation to honor our parents in our decision making and never to feel or think that we are independent from them. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So this is a lesson that we learn from the life of our 11th Imam. He became the Imam at the age of 22, and after 6 years, the period of his imamat came to an end. He was only 28 years old, a very young life, but a very blessed and a very productive life. That is an example for us and for how we should think of the process of raising our youth to be able to follow the footsteps and derive inspiration from the lives of Ahlul Bayt. Now, let us honor this occasion by looking at a few of the ahadith and a few of the teachings of our 11th Imam, Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi salatu wassalam. One of those very good reminders for us is hadith in which the Imam said, من الذنوب التي لا تغفر قول المرء يا ليتني لم أؤاخذ إلا بهذا. Sometimes a person says that, I'm pretty good as a person, as a human being. I say my prayers, I fulfill my obligations, I feel like I'm pretty good. I feel like I am above average. And the only thing is that, I have a few minor, insignificant weaknesses. And if this is the only thing that Allah is going to judge me for, then I'm pretty good. Some of us can probably relate to that, because our society and our culture pushes us in that direction of saying, don't have any regrets. Don't look back. Don't second guess yourself. Live in the moment, make decisions in the moment, and then never look back and say, it should have been different. Or I should have paused, I should have thought, I should have gone and gotten the advice of an elder or someone more experienced. So our society encourages us, in fact, sometimes almost pushes us to be impulsive and to live based on our whims and our feelings at the moment, and not to be overly concerned about a higher standard. And when you don't have a higher standard, then you don't regret and you don't judge yourself harshly, because you're just measuring yourself against what you feel at the moment. Our 11th Imam says, مِنَ الذُّنُوبِ الَّتِي لَا تُغْفَرْ. One of those sins that is not forgiven is for a person to say, my only fault is that I have a little bit of a short temper. My only fault is that sometimes I like to gossip. My only fault is that sometimes I don't wake up for Fajr, but I make it up afterwards. It's just a small thing. And on balance, I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should send me to heaven. Maybe there's just this one thing. If He can just overlook this one thing, then I'm pretty confident about how I'm doing in life. To think a sin is insignificant, to think that a sin is not a big deal, to say that, well, I'm living in the 21st century, I'm living surrounded by all this evil and all this sin, what do you expect? That is a sign that we are arrogant. And that is a risk factor for our sins not to be forgiven. Don't cut yourself that slack and say that, well, in this day and age, for me to be even doing this much is pretty good. Because once you become complacent and you become self-satisfied and you think that you're doing pretty good, that is going to be the day that you are not motivated to look to somebody better than you and try to become better than you are today. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now that might seem like it's a very hopeless thing. So now we have to be harsh on ourselves. In the end, you are living in the 21st century. In the end, we do have a hadith from the Prophet that in my time, if somebody practices 9/10 of Islam, then there is the expectation of salvation for them. But a time will come in Akhirul Zaman where out of 10 commandments of Islam, if a person fulfills one of the commandments, then that person will have the worthiness of salvation, because it will become so difficult to earn halal sustenance and to live a halal life. So Allah Himself does tell us that He will cut us slack, that this is the key. I should not cut myself slack by saying, I am pretty good. I should recognize that Allah will cut me slack because He is infinitely merciful. So this message is not a message of judging yourself harshly and being pessimistic and always thinking that, well, I make so many mistakes, I'm going to go to hell. No, it is to be realistic with ourselves and to measure ourselves not against yesterday, not against my whim, measure myself against my potential. And I will always come up short. And I will always feel like I am failing. But then the source of my hope is that the rahmah of Allah overcomes all things. And it doesn't have any limitations. So you still have hope, but the hope doesn't come by elevating yourself. The hope comes from connecting yourself to that never-ending spring of mercy and beneficence, and that is the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And one other teaching of our 11th Imam, it is reported that he says, خَصْلَتَانْ لَيْسَ فَوْقَهُمَا شَيْءٍ. There are two attributes that are the greatest attributes that you can develop. It's not a long list. Sometimes when we look at our obligations as a Muslim, we have quite a long list of things that we are weak in. The Imam says that the greatest attributes are two. خَصْلَتَانْ لَيْسَ فَوْقَهُمَا شَيْءٍ. So strive for these two attributes. And if you have these two attributes, then it's not going to do the task for you and say that you don't have to worry about everything else, but it will make it much easier for you to do everything else. When you have a high goal and a sublime horizon, then the minor tasks in the way, they fall into place by themselves. If my only goal is that I want to just get through the next year of school or the next year of my life, then when I look at what comes after it, I might start to get overwhelmed. But if I say that my goal is to reach this professional milestone in my life, and that might take 12 years, that might take 15 years, then all of the intermediate goals that come before, they become easier. You still have to do the effort. You have to get through the first year, you have to pass the test, you have to get admission, you have to go through the training, you have to go through the performance evaluation. So all of those steps are there. But because your horizon and your vision is seeing the end goal, then all of those intermediate steps, they fall into place and they become easier for you to do. You still have to put the effort, but they become easier. So what Imam Hassan Askari is telling us is, what? Salawat ala Muhammad. What is your highest goal? Right? What are the greatest attributes? خَصْلَتَانْ لَيْسَ فَوْقَهُمَا شَيْءٍ. And then if you get that, then inshaAllah, the other goals that you have in life, they will fall into place. 2. Number 1, al-Iman billah. Put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't think your happiness, your success, your salvation, your needs are anything in this world. Nowadays, sometimes we click on an online order and we're excited when our doorbell is going to ring and we're going to get the thing that we've ordered. Or we have a plan for what we're going to do in our winter break or in our vacation, and we are counting down to it, and we are excited about a plan that we have, a goal that we have, a purchase that we've made, something in this world. Iman means you put your hope, you put your aspirations, you put your greatest excitement not in something that's going to be delivered to your front door, not in something that you're going to do or you're going to experience in this life, not in a possession, not in an experience, not in a trip, not in anything of this world, but in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So your source of amn and security and tranquility in life is Allah. First attribute is al-imanu billah. Put your trust in God. And the second and final attribute the Imam mentions is وَنَفْعُ الْإِخْوَانِ. Try to give benefit to your fellow believers. When you have accomplished what you want to accomplish in life, then think, what can I do for someone else? Not what can I do for myself. Our third Imam, Imam Hussain, Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salatu wassalam. He says that when people ask you for help, let's say that you are the person in a difficult class in school that knows the answers and can figure out even the most difficult assignment. And so everyone comes to you for help. Don't think that that is a burden and you want to kind of somehow disappear so people don't come to you. Any haja that people have, our third Imam says, those hajat of people that they come to you with, those are God's blessings that He is sending to you. No greater blessing than for somebody to know that you have money, you can give them a loan. Usually I think that I need to hide people, not tell them I got a raise, not tell them that I have some money put aside, otherwise they will come to me and say, well, you know what, I need this. Can you help me? We try to keep that separate, and of course we do have to manage our lives. We can't say yes to everyone, or then we will not be able to take care of our responsibilities and our other needs. But don't do so because you are hesitant to help other people. That my experience, my knowledge, my contacts, my wealth, my abilities, I should keep them secret, otherwise everybody's going to come and ask me for assistance. According to the logic of Ahlul Bayt, those hajat are God's blessings. If you want to be blessed, then help other people in their needs. Otherwise, God will still want to provide that assistance to His servants. But God will just say that you are not a good person to be the means and the vessel. It has to be somebody else instead. So our 11th Imam, he says, there are two attributes. خَصْلَتَانْ لَيْسَ فَوْقَهُمَا شَيْءٍ الْإِيمَانُ بِاللَّهِ وَنَفْعُ الْإِخْوَانِ. Two greatest things that we should aspire to are not to have hope in anything but God, or have faith in anything but God. And number two, in our worldly life, to want to try to share our knowledge, our experience, our material wealth and abundance as much as possible with our fellow believers. That is the highest aspiration. So these were two of the teachings of our Imam. One is the two highest aspirations that we have as a believer, and one is a sin that we might consider minor, but that is perhaps the one sin that will not be forgiven, the one that I think is not a big deal, and that makes me complacent. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And now let us look at the circumstances of the imamat and the martyrdom of our Imam and the lessons that we derive from that. Allah knows best why our 11th Imam and the final Imam before the ghaiba and the imamat of Imam Mahdi alayhi salam, had the shortest imamat. But maybe one of the reasons is because there is a lesson that we learn in times of hardship and in times of difficulty, which is that tradition and continuity can help you get through times of difficulty. America is a culture and a society that doesn't value tradition. So in American language, culture, if I say new, the first thing that comes into your mind is a positive and a favorable connotation. We say new and improved. We don't say new and concerning. We say out with the old and in with the new. And certainly that has resulted in intellectual advancements, technological advancements, cultural advancements. But the reality is also not to be ignored that it has resulted in spiritual harm. Because while culture changes, society changes, technology changes, politics changes, the fitrah and the needs of the human soul, they do not change. Sometimes we fool ourselves into thinking that human beings today need something very different from people many generations ago. But the human soul is not a function of intellectual advancements. The human soul is not a function of technological advancements. The human soul is first and foremost a spiritual creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And its needs and its important faculties, they are the same as they were in the time of Prophet Adam, the same in the time of our previous prophets and our own prophet and Ahlul Bayt. They are unchanging. So in times of crisis and hardship in particular, that continuity and those traditions, they can give us strength to be able to understand changed circumstances and to meet the needs of changed circumstances. So when something changes, don't look down on your traditions. Don't look down on your culture. Don't look down on the advice or the practices of your parents or your grandparents and say it's old, therefore it's backwards. It's old, therefore it's not going to be relevant to my needs and to my times. Yes, circumstances will change, but one of the things that is going to give you the strength and the ability to meet those changed circumstances is going to be the very legacy and traditions that you inherited from the previous generations of believers. And if your own family is a family of believers, then the legacy and the traditions that you will have inherited from your own families. So this short period of imamat, one of the things that it allowed is for the continuity from the previous traditions of the imams to remain in the forefront of the life of the Shia. It's very interesting in the wisdom of Allah that our 10th Imam, although he became Imam at a very young age, at the age of 8, and he was still a child, but he remained Imam for 34 years. It was a long period of imamat. He built and he strengthened certain institutions and certain traditions for the Shia. And then our 11th Imam had a short period of imamat, 6 years. which was preparation, which was a transition. And maybe one of the wisdoms and the reasons was to remind us that the continuity of those traditions that had come from the previous Imams, that continuity is what is going to be a source of strength for the Shia community when the difficult test of the disappearance or the occultation, the ghaiba of our Imam Mahdi alayhi salatu wasalam takes place. So out of the 4 nuwab, the ambassadors of the 12th Imam, all of you are familiar with the 4 naibs, the 4 ambassadors of the 12th Imam in the first shorter occultation. One of them was Uthman ibn Sayyid, the first of them. And he was also an agent and a wakil of our 11th Imam. And before our 11th Imam, he was an agent and a wakil of our 10th Imam. In fact, his period in the time of the 12th Imam was very short. And then after his death, his son, Muhammad ibn Uthman ibn Sayyid al-Amri, he became the second agent of the 12th Imam, followed by 2 more agents, Hussein ibn Ruh and Ali ibn Muhammad as-Samarri. So that is a reminder of continuity. Keep your connection and keep your familiarity with the scholars, with the ulama, with the sources of guidance and wisdom, and the lived practice of Shi'ism in our ritual and in our worship that we have inherited to help us in times of difficulty, and of course, then we adjust and we adapt to new circumstances. In the time of Imam Hassan Askari, the oppression of the Caliphate reached its peak. The entire period of his imamat, our Imam was in house arrest. And it is said that 2 of the previous caliphs before the final caliph of his time, they attempted to assassinate our Imam. Imagine that he was only Imam for 6 years. And 3 caliphs made an attempt to kill our Imam, of which the 3rd attempt was the one that resulted in the martyrdom of our Imam. 3 attempts within the space of 6 years, in a time when our Imam was in house arrest. First the Caliph Mu'taz, then Muhtadi, and finally it was in the time of Mu'tamad, when our Imam was in a period of house arrest. He was in his home, not able to leave his home, not able to meet with his Shia, not able to publicly introduce his son and his heir and his successor, the 12th Imam, to his Shia and to his community, when our Imam was poisoned and he was martyred on the command of Mu'tamad, the Caliph of the Abbasids. And it was a time of great oppression. In many ways, there is a parallel between the martyrdom of our 11th Imam and the martyrdom of our 3rd Imam in Karbala, although superficially there was a big difference. In Karbala, there was nobody who was there to mourn our Imam. And the multitudes, they were celebrating the death of the grandson of the Messenger of Allah. Imam Zainul Abidin, when he told people the scene of the afternoon of Ashura, he recounted how it was that Imam Hussein was martyred. Alone, he said, hunted as an animal is hunted by people who hunt for pleasure and for leisure, surrounded, attacked from all sides. Thousands of soldiers, those who were in the front lines, they would cast their weapons and arrows at the Imam, and in the background there was a drumbeat, there was a sound of celebration. That was the field of Karbala. On a superficial level, Samarra was very different. The entire city was declared to be a place of mourning. History tells us that the city of Samarra, on the day of the martyrdom of the 11th Imam, it was a scene of qiyamah. There was never a janazah as well attended. There were never as many people wearing black as there were on the time of the martyrdom of our 11th Imam, that Ibn al-Rida, the great grandson of Imam Rida, has died. But in many ways it was not that different from the field of Karbala, when there were many present, but they were there as oppressors. Because in Samarra, the Caliph pretended that even though he was the one who had martyred the Imam, it was he who was mourning the Imam. It was he who should receive the prayers and the condolence of those who loved Ahlul Bayt. And so there was a sea of humanity in Samarra, but those who were the Shia, those who were the lovers of Ahlul Bayt, they were not able to visit the Imam on his deathbed. They were not able to offer their du'as and their prayers to the Imam. They were not able to come and stand in the Salatul Janazah and offer their prayers according to their wishes. In fact, the government even intended to say that it will be a relative of the Caliph who will come and officiate and lead in the burial of the Imam. And then they put forward the brother of Imam Hassan Askari, Ja'far ibn Ali, in order to be the one to lead the prayer. And it is said that although people had no expectation, there was a young child that very few people had seen before, only 5 years of age, with tears in his eyes, who had not been seen in public before. This was the suffering of Imam Hassan Askari, that this one young son, 5 years of age, who had been foretold by every prophet and every Imam, when our 6th Imam would remember him, then he would shed tears and he would say, I would give my life for you. This pearl of humanity, the hope of all of humanity, and the hope and prayer of the Shia could not be introduced to humanity because of the fear for his life. At that moment, without anybody knowing where he came from, this young boy, the 12th Imam, came forward and said to his uncle that, "Oh my uncle, I am the son and the heir of Imam Hassan Askari who had passed away. I have a greater right to lead his janazah and to lead his prayer." The 12th Imam stepped forward, but nobody was able to know. Just those who were very close, they found out that the 12th Imam is leading the prayer. He led the prayer, and then he bent forward and he bid farewell to his father, Imam Hassan Askari, and then he left. This was a miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once again it reminds us of Karbala, when another son came and people didn't know where he came from and where he went afterwards. But what a different scene it was. The tribe of Bani Asad, who lived in the vicinity of Karbala, they had just come to see the bodies of the martyrs of Karbala lying on the sand, and they didn't know who was who. They didn't know which was the body of Hussein ibn Ali, which was the body of Ali Akbar, which was the body of Aun and Muhammad and Qasim, because the bodies had been mutilated. The bodies had been crushed under the hooves of horses. The heads had been separated from the body. Even their clothing had been taken from them. But just as Allah brought the 12th Imam by miracle to lead the janazah of our 11th Imam, Allah brought through a miracle our 4th Imam. His hands were still in chains, a neck was still still fettered by a heavy rope, and there was still fresh wounds on his body. He came forward and he said, "O Bani Asad, if you don't know which body belongs to which martyr, I was here when they were martyred. I will tell you where to dig the grave, and I will tell you where to place each body." And then Imam Zain al-Abidin, he performed the janazah of his loved ones that he could not perform on Ashura. And just as our 12th Imam left by miracle, Imam Zain al-Abidin left Karbala by the miracle of Allah and returned to the dungeon to be reunited with the family of the Prophet in their imprisonment in Kufa. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Atam Hussain.
We will not forget Karbala. We will not forget you, Hussein. We will not forget Karbala. We will not forget you, Hussein. We will not forget Karbala. We will not forget you, Hussein. From the day that we were born till the day that we will die, we will not forget your ultimate sacrifice. In your name the tears will stream from our eyes. Your name forever will be heard from the sky. This is our promise to you, Fatima, oh Fatima. We will not forget Karbala.
We will not forget you,
Hussein. We will not forget Karbala. We will not forget you, Hussein. In the land of Karbala, you were standing all alone with the family around and so far away from home. No one was by Hussein, but today we have shown till the day that we will die. To your shrine we will crawl. This is our promise to you, Fatima, oh Fatima. We will not forget Karbala.
we will not forget you, Hussein.
We will not forget Karbala. We will not forget you, Hussein. Our master was alone, thirsty in Karbala, as he put his head down for his final sajda. From the skies a voice came, Nafsi mutmainna, we will cry forever upon this, O Zahra. This is our promise to you, Fatima, oh Fatima. We will not forget Karbala.
We will not forget you, Hussein.
We will not forget Karbala. We will not forget you, Hussein. There will come a day when we will have to make a stand. When Badiri appears, we will build the Holy Land. We will pay attention to his every command. We will be by Hussein, Mu'mineen, hand in hand. This is our promise to you, Fatima, oh Fatima. We will not forget Karbala.
We will not forget you, Hussein.
We will not forget Karbala. you, Hussein. Throughout history, there has been no warrior that compares to Abbas, the son of Haidar. Loyalty and courage mean to him forever. Gave his life for the love of his brother. This is a promise to you, Fatima. Oh, Fatima, we will not forget Karbala. We will not forget you, Hussein. We will not forget Karbala. We will not forget you, Hussein. We will not forget Karbala. We will not forget you, Hussein.
Stand for ziyarah. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام على علي أمير المؤمنين. السلام على فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام على الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة. السلام على علي بن الحسين زين العابدين. السلام على محمد بن علي الباقر. السلام على جعفر بن محمد الصادق. السلام على موسى بن جعفر الكاظم. السلام على علي بن موسى الرضا. السلام على محمد بن علي الجواد. السلام على علي بن محمد الهادي. السلام على الحسن بن علي الزكي العسكري. السلام على الحجة بن الحسن القائم المهدي صلوات الله عليهم أجمعين.